All right. Well, I'm gonna take this off. I still wear it every once in a while to, like I said, I don't know if other people have little kids or what's going on with them, so I want to make sure I was being sensitive. But this is with finances in transition, but it's kind of an overall look at finances throughout. From a biblical, I don't want to say a completely biblical standpoint, but from a spiritual as well as practical. If everybody, I don't think we've ever met. I'm James, by the way. And for those of you online or who are going to watch this later on, I'm James Russell. But I do work in finances, but that's not necessarily what I enjoy doing. But there is opportunities within here to be practical. So I don't have anything on here yet. And am I good to just say next time? Okay. But I do want to say that regardless of what you're going through, this will allow opportunities to see needs in finances and where adjustments can be made, but also from a biblical standpoint, and not just like this is not a get rich. If you've ever read the Bible, especially the New Testament, not anything about finances of getting rich. It's having those in heaven versus being rich on earth, and not this rich. But I do want to say as a disclosure, and for those of you online, these are my words, my thoughts. So if you please contact me if there's any clarification or correction that's needed before you go to anybody else. I'm good. Just have a conversation. And if you will go to the next slide, I do want to say this. It should be up there. Is there a next? Yeah. Just to make sure, anytime that you will ever talk to anybody in finances, you will hear this disclosure or something like it of saying, this is not financial advice. Please contact a financial advisor. And I'm putting that these are my random thoughts of my personal experience. And the reason why is because if you take any of this advice and something goes wrong, then especially within the United States, you have legal recourse for someone of saying, hey, you gave me this financial advice. So that's why most people will say, if they're good at what they do, they will say this is not financial advice. Kind of like as a doctor saying like, hey, see your doctor or medical, this is not medical advice. Like it needs to have someone to look at your specific circumstances. So for everybody who's out there, please do not sue me. If you lose anything, that's life. We've all been there. So I did want to put there for it. And usually, most of the times for financial advisors, that's for retirement or big decisions, people who can look at your particular situation, see what's going on, and make a dedicated, hey, here's where we can see this. And that's what they do. So that's the reason why I'm saying that, so to be clear. All right, if you can go to the next slide. This will be the overview of, I just kind of titled these that it's all God's, like all the finances, everything that we do, it's all God's. I'm grateful that I get to use it every once in a while, but it's all for God and His glory. What's at the root? I put that as we're going to go through some things for either excess of funds or most of the times the non-excess or depreciation or depletion of funds, and saying what's actually at the root of any of the financial concerns and issues. And then what I call plan, track, revise, and stick. You'll see those a little bit later branched out on. So if you'll go to the next slide, please. Should be for our overview for It's All God's. And actually, all of these are just kind of coming in there. For the scriptures that are on here, I would encourage, feel free to write these down, but these are directed towards reminding us that it's all God and the provision. And I put Matthew 6:11. It's also in Luke, but 6:11 is actually the Lord's Prayer. But this is the part where we're praying, where Jesus is telling his disciples of saying, hey, we're praying this day for our daily bread. And the reason why that's important, or I think in finances, and especially from a spiritual aspect, is there's a lot of times that we're like, Lord, hey, give us the jet. None of us, I think, are really dying for a jet, but our excess, and we're wanting the Lord to bless and give us the excess. But what Jesus is actually saying is, hey, Pray for your daily needs, for your sustenance. And you'll find out that if we're following the Lord, then our desires and what we want to do with our finances will actually be in line. And God will always bless that. Like as a church, believe it or not, we rely on us. And I say that we because of being part of the church council, but we are always reliant upon anybody giving towards what the Lord is doing. So if we're being obedient and we have a healthy church, people are giving. Sometimes people give for whatever reasons, but if you have healthy things, you'll have healthy goals, and the Lord will bring the finances. Regardless, if you look at everybody together as a church and what we're able to accomplish, God's blessing us far beyond what we can do. I know even just my little contribution is, oh my, thank you, Lord, for that. 1 Thessalonians 4:11 through 12. This is talking about where Paul is talking to the Thessalonians, and he's saying, hey, you know what? We want you to work to not be a burden. And that doesn't mean like depending on what your circumstances is, but it's saying to live a quiet life, to work so that you are an example to others when they come in, that our blessing, whatever we have, is able to assist others in the gospel, in the life, versus, well, it's just for me. And this is my wife over there. If you didn't know, that's my daughter. But I can't live by myself. I can't do my finances by myself. I have to include them. But this is an opportunity for us to grow spiritually. And again, if you're in line with what the Lord is doing, our desires will go towards what he wants. And you'll see the blessings there. Or potentially see the blessings there. I don't want to say, hey, if you're obedient and you do all this, God's going to do it. No. God changes circumstances many times. For money, worry and doubt, I would just, Matthew 6, Luke 12, 22 through 34, 1 Timothy 6:10, Hebrews 13:5. I highlighted the 34, but it's actually 33 for Luke 12. If you want to be concerned and say, like, you know what, I'm tired of worrying about finances. All of those verses cover doubt, worry of, hey, you can't serve God and money at the same time. But Luke 12:33 really kind of punches it home and says, hey, you don't want to worry about money? Sell everything that you have. Give it to the poor. Guess what? When you have nothing, you're not worried about money. They're like, okay, here, let's get rid of that worry. But that's what takes us out. If I think that my financial situation is better, it keeps me from trusting the Lord. My personal experience. Maybe you've had situations where more finances, you're like, I'm trusting God even more. For me, the more finances I do, I don't want to say the less prayer, but I'm less reliant on God. I'm more reliant upon myself or my employer or whatever source of income that there is. And this allows me to not only be reliant upon the Lord, but upon those around us as well. So I would encourage you to look at that. And this is I like this for Psalms 46:10. I'm not a real big picture guy, but I thought it was nice. But it's saying, let go of your concerns, then you will know that I am God. I rule the nations, I rule the earth. I tried not to bring everything out from the Old Testament because you have a lot of you do this, I will bless you, which still applies, but there's a lot of things with Jesus where he's saying, hey, you're going to be persecuted, and you're not going to have, or lay up your treasures in heaven versus laying them up on here. But all that to say, this is still, how do we do this within our current day? Be sane, be safe, and continue to be believers and have finances. I'm to be honest with you, I'm very grateful that the Lord has blessed us with what we have, but I'm getting ready for it to be taken away. And I want to make sure that my heart is saying, like, Lord, I'm grateful when we have income and we're blessed, but Lord, I'm also grateful when I have absolutely nothing, because we're relying upon the Lord. All right, if you'll go to the next slide. What's at the root? And that's paper time. Anytime that there's paper time, that's on there. This is where I would like for you to write something down. You don't have to, but I would encourage you to. I'm one of those guys who rarely writes anything down when someone asks me to. So if you don't, I understand. But I do want to write something down. And one of the things I'm looking at this for the root of the problem, or maybe not root of the problem, but again, of looking at this and saying, is for finances, is it income? Usually a lot of times it's like, hey, I don't have enough income. Is it expenses? Because if you look at your income, you're like, hey, I should be doing this. Is it the expenses? Do we have too many expenses that we need to reprioritize? Living beyond our means. Are we greedy? I have to look at that at every time that I get something with finances. If I get a raise or some additional thing comes in, am I looking like, oh, well, I need a new TV. I need a new this. Or am I saying, you know what? Let's make sure that we're looking at this. And I'm going to tell you my personal experiences, which kind of is dictated to, or not dictated, but congruent with what my wife does, but also of making sure. And am I trying to allow God to reorder my circumstances, my bank account, my comfort level? So the thing I would encourage you to write down, again, even if the word is nothing, but of saying, what in your current financial situation, at least just one, what do you think is the main concern that you said, you know what, if this was taken care of, I would be okay? I know that sometimes changes for me depending on the season, the month of what's going on, whether it be income, whether it be expenses. I know that there, a way to say more money, more problems. Less money, less problems. Doesn't seem like it, but there's sometimes you're like, hey, you don't have anything to do? You don't have to worry about that. You don't have electricity? You don't have to worry about electric bill. What was that? Yeah. What like right as of right now, if you're looking at your finances and anything of saying like what is the main concern? And by the way, I would say regardless of your income level or whatever is going on, you can always answer that. If you're being honest, you can always say, you know what? Here's where I could be a little bit more in whatever situation. The next slide, if you'll go ahead and go to that. Oh, all right. So it's more of just like a PDF. So I apologize. Most of these should be coming down in different ways. But this section is looking at planning and budgeting, is how much should go where. And I have it where it has like, needs, wants, and the root. That's more a little bit of debts and savings. But I would like for you to write something down as well. Please don't look at the rest of that slide there, but of what would, I guess go back to make it easier. But if you would write down, what would you consider in your given circumstances, what are your needs? And I'll give you a couple seconds or whatever to write down what you think your current needs are and what your current wants are. And you'll find out that those are different, and they will look different. My wife and I kind of disagreed on needs and wants. And from a financial standpoint, from a godly or from a spiritual standpoint, biblical standpoint, and from a financial standpoint, I want to go with some what we consider needs and wants. And there's no right or wrong. It's just the more honest you are with yourself, I don't want to say the better or easier that it is, but it's a start in going in the right direction of looking at your finances appropriately. All right, it looks like most of us are kind of going, and feel free to continue to write as you necessary. Can you go ahead and go to the next slide? That will give us the rest of these. And by the way, all of these it's not a comprehensive list. But it's something to get us thinking. And I used us as being in California and Southern California as it is. For necessities, I put housing. There's regardless of what that looks like, that doesn't mean buying a house or anything. You could be living with your parents. As I know, there are a couple of us in here who are in that situation. Whatever your situation is, housing, that goes it. You could be living with a bunch of roommates, and that's not your family. Like if they're contributing finances, you're contributing finances. Those are roommates. If not, you are either a child or I don't know the official term, but I think it's freeloader. But no, that's also people are blessing. So instead of looking at that like you're contributing, groceries, and there's a reason why I put groceries versus food, because necessities you do need to eat, but actually I'll get a little bit more into that, into the wants of how you were eating, what is going on. Transportation. We all live in Southern California. If you are going anywhere, you need some type of transportation, whether it be your bicycle, walking, skateboard, the metro. Metro is great. I don't get paid by the metro, but it's great. It's a great way to get around. It's inexpensive when you're considering an automobile, insurance, all of that that goes along with it. I have utilities and gas. Utilities for anything if you're paying water, trash, electric, anything that goes along with that, and gas if you have transportation, not just utilities for gas, and then insurance. Now that could be medical insurance if you are looking at that, but if you have transportation, it's illegal if you do not have insurance. So that's why I included that for California. You might think though, like, you know what? I don't have to pay for insurance. Until you get your car impounded, you get pulled over, whatever goes on, that's going to cost you a lot more. Or medical insurance. If you're on, I don't know if it's still called Medi-Cal, but for California, is it Medi-Cal? Does anybody know? Okay, yeah, that is a situation depending on your financial situation, which that is better than nothing. And if you were in that situation, I was in that situation for maybe 18 years of my life, the first 18 years, and I will say it will give you the basic of the basic, but I was very grateful for it. So if anybody, I don't know if anybody has ever been out, well, regardless, that stigma that goes along with that, please kick it out. Know that there are programs in place to allow people to have medical concerns. I don't care what your political affiliation is. For those of you online, I don't care what your political affiliation is. You can talk to me. This isn't Pasadena Foursquare. This is just me. But if your political affiliation or anything else overwrites what God's doing, if your right to be an American or anything else overwrites that, knock it off. Knock it off. Allow people to have insurance. Allow people to have medical care and food. That's what we should be doing as a church. That applies to us as well. And by the way, I can't see the mirror that's in there, but I'm applying that to myself as well to make sure. Because if I'm looking at someone else in their situation, I'm like, oh, well, We're all in that situation. And gratefully, hopefully, we are in the situation where God has blessed us and say, you know what? Let's bless somebody else. And I'm grateful if the church isn't doing it, if we're not doing it, or not doing it personally, I'm grateful that the government is doing it. Again, my personal opinion, feel free to talk to me about that, but please back it up scripturally. Okay, I don't want to make it weird or whatever, so hopefully I apologize if I offend anybody, but if that offended you a little bit, that's a good thing. Let's talk. Wants, entertainment, Netflix. I will just say entertainment. Whatever you consider entertainment, that is always a want. Regardless if you're like, oh, I'm bored to death. That's figurative. That's not literal, even though I know that definition has been changed. But that is a good way to look at this. Entertainment, clothing. And my wife and I went back in this. I'm like, no, clothing is a want. I'm like, is a necessity. If you're looking at something every month, if you're looking at the time frame, you buy clothes. But the wants, what you're buying, if you're not going to a secondhand, and I'm not talking like trendy secondhand store. I'm talking about the secondhand store where hey, I can get a bunch of clothes for like $7. If you're going anyplace else, those are wants. They might seem like needs, but they're wants. You're like, well, hey, I have this, or my social status. That's a want. That's something that you can afford and go in with that. That is different than, hey, I'm wearing rags or I'm not wearing anything. If you are close to being naked, that's a necessity. If you're like, hey, I want better shoes or I want something better, hey, I want to, I wear a bunch of just black t-shirts because they're inexpensive, super inexpensive. But how we're doing that as are the wants. And then eating out. Eating out right now for our family, I'll use my family as an example, is roughly almost $10 a person. Even sometimes if we were going to McDonald's, I know, but McDonald's, whatever your affiliation with McDonald's, don't care. It's super inexpensive. It might not be the healthiest thing, but if you're on a budget and you're trying to spread that and you're eating out, McDonald's isn't a bad way to do it. You might feel a little bit bad later on. That's why you're paying for the medical insurance or whatever. But I am going to say that's an inexpensive way to do it. And when you don't have a lot, hey, you're looking for anything. There's a desperation that is related to that. And you're like, oh, we can't go to this place. I'm like, oh, but it'll be healthy in the longer run. Not if you're running out of food. That's why I say groceries. And for groceries, I will put this back. For anybody who's online, if you go into the grocery store, doesn't matter the grocery store. You know what grocery store is going to rip you off. You know what grocery store is not going to. Look for the WIC. What's WIC? And that, hopefully no one saw the spit, but I just said it. Look for WIC because if you're on the WIC program, I don't know what else, I want to say food stamps, but if whatever you know it is that you are receiving anything from an EBT card or within that, those are items that the government has designated of saying that you can purchase this. They're great. There are a lot of carbs. Rice is great for a long period of time. You can flavor it. Milk, bread. Those are things that we're looking at for the necessities. And then I'm going to put in a debt. And by the way, the wants can be everything else. I just trying to fit it down to a slide. You can put that for anything related to that. And again, that's going to be a little bit different for each of us. Debit and savings. And I put this debit and savings. I put tithes in this area. And that is because these are completely separate from our needs and our wants. But if you're paying down debt or trying to save, like I really want to put tithes in the necessities. But I know depending on situations, that's a debit and savings. That's depending on what the Lord is doing. But I'm going to say tithes. It's super important. I'm not going to say you cannot be a part of the church or God's not going to bless you or something stupid like that. If you ever hear anything related to that is dumb, stop listening to those people. Or at least ask them, like, what do you actually mean by this? Because we don't pay for this. These aren't monthly dues based off of your income. Like, well, hey, you pay 10%, but like, no. Hopefully, if you're paying tithes or if you're not paying tithes, if you're paying tithes, it's saying, hey, I believe in what God is doing in this church, and I want to be a part of that with my finances, with my time, with what's going on. It's not a monthly membership. It's not something that has to be done. So that's why normally I don't say stuff like that when going for tithes, but if you heard that video, if you're paying tithes or not, this is not a requirement for God. You have already been saved. Hopefully you've been saved. If you're watching this, great. If not, then, talk to us as well. But for finances, God is not concerned with your finances. He doesn't need them. But it's a way for us to partner with what God is doing around us. And that's actually what it's for. I'm not paying tithes because I'm like, oh, Lord, this is horrible. Let me do this. And I'm looking for the verse where it's like, hey, don't pay anything. Don't do anything. I'm like, I want that money to go to something else. However, I still believe in what the church is doing, and I want to partner with that. And not just with my time, but with my finance as well. And sometimes that is a sacrifice. A lot of times that is a sacrifice. And I'm still giving. Not out of shame, not out of like, oh, God's not going to, no. Or like, hey, I'm on the council. I'm like, I don't care. I'm really looking at what is God doing and how can we be a part of that. Again, that's my personal experience. You might have something different, but I will say, if someone ever, even in this church, are like, hey, you better give your tithes. And as part of the church council, we use it and we do it well. I've been in other churches where I'm like, we need to do this better. But I will say that's not a requirement for church, and not a requirement for, it is spiritual growth in what's going on, but nothing else. I'll save that for later because that's not part of this. But also for debt and savings, debt, I put rainy day, emergency, and for the future. And when you're looking at debt and savings, if your savings is paying very, very little, but your debt is piling up more and more, be cautious with that. All right, if we can go to the next one. Track. This will be pretty cool. I was going to have you guys write something down. If you want to, what do you use now? If you're tracking your finances. Some of us use an app. Some of us use programs. Maybe you use nothing. Maybe you're just like, hey, what's in my current balance? Let me see what's going on with that. I would encourage you to track. And if you're not tracking, then based off of what you're planning or budgeting, you can't see where everything is going. And you want to be able to see. I put on here, like if you're super inexpensive, lined paper, a pencil, just in case you need to erase, and a calculator. Calculators are great to be able to understand what's going on. And it's super inexpensive. But you need to use a calculator because if you're not good at math or you make a mistake, then your finances are kind of gone. Excel or numbers based off of the Apple program, different apps. Better Money Habits. It's a website, bettermoneyhabits. A financial institution that I might be affiliated with. I'm not saying the financial institution because they're not horrible. I'm very grateful for my salary. But that is also if you're looking for financial Better Money Habits from the guy from Khan Academy, Saul Khan, who has partnered with this financial institution. That's really good. But I wanted to say, what you were using as well. But the tracking is very important. It's hard to budget. It's hard to plan. It's hard to look at this if you don't know where your money is going. If you use cash all the time, get a receipt. Know where something is going. If not, I use my card all the time, which isn't good if it's an emergency because you have no cash, but it's an easy way to track. But I also say, like, hey, if I'm going to this place, if I go to Target or something, I'm saying, where am I tracking this? Am I getting food here? Am I getting, toilet paper? Whatever I'm doing, I want to make sure that I'm tracking that. And just versus Target, like, that's very vague. All right. My wife gave me the symbol, so I think I'm taking longer than I probably wanted to, but can you move to the next one? All right, revise. This is an opportunity to always look at your budget and your planning and to have a revision. Know why you're doing something. Oh, awesome. No, that's actually good. Revising allows your plan some flexibility. As you plan, and I didn't say it, but as you're planning, as you're budgeting, pray. Like, what should I be using this for? What should I be looking at for? God, how do you want us to do our finances? I'm saying us because that's in my vocabulary for a while. But and I have cleaned it up. We had a storage space when we were moving from one house to another, and there was stuff that we didn't use for a year. Or maybe you have been, stuck in your house for a year and a half. And there are some things that you used to pay for that you no longer pay for. This is a good time to look at things and say, like, hey, do we need to be paying for this? Is this worthwhile if you haven't used it in a year and a half? There are probably some other things where you're like, oh, you know what? I haven't used this in a year and a half. I need to make way in my budget because I'm going to start using this again. Like for gas or for things. We started, using more gas as we were going around a little bit more for work, whatever it might be, of making sure that you're looking at those things within your budget. For new and unplanned expenses, I have inflation. I know it's in the news. There's always going to be something good or bad in the news. That's the way to keep our intention. Like, hey, here's this. But inflation, I always look at bread, milk, and eggs. If you're concerned about finances and where your budget is, especially if you're living from, I call it either glory to glory, like paycheck to paycheck, or beyond paycheck to paycheck, look at the price of milk, bread, and eggs. If those start going up, everything else is going to start going up as well, because those are the necessities. Those are the things that that if they go up, you're paying for everything else. And inflation just means, hey, you're paying more for the same thing. So the amount of money that you're paying, like the is inflated, but you're still getting the same stuff. It's not getting better or more stuff. Same stuff, costs more money. That's where it's tough. And in most situations, income has not increased as much as it actually costs the cost of living. Paying off debt. That's always a good thing, especially as a believer. Pay off debt. Like, not just a financial thing, get rid of debt. If we incur the debt, gratefully, sin was already paid for us, or the cost of all that has been paid for us. But if you're in debt, try and pay it off. Do not do that at the expense of the rest of your finances. But if you can pay off debt, especially higher interest rated whatever, pay that off. Allow us to be good stewards of our money and get that lower. There's some debt that's kind of good. Can't completely go over that without, especially if it's being recorded. But there's some good debt that you have that it's actually a benefit for you. There's other debt that is detrimental to you, and then there's even more debt that is no one really looks at it from a credit standpoint. Like, I'll just say, ouch, that kind of debt doesn't do anything. Or turn to page 43, I want you to do 22 problems. That kind of debt is not looked at. So hopefully you'll, if you don't understand that, then let me know. But those are things that are not looked at if you're buying automobiles, houses, secured debt, credit cards. That's not necessarily looked at because that's something within our society. You know, most people don't go, ouch, and then, you know, like, hey, we're going to penalize you because someone smacked you on the arm. So hopefully that's getting there. Kind of quick, I would advise you for the revise is what is something that you can put in your plan that will allow you to either grow finances or eliminate debt. And to be fair, there might be times where you're looking at it like, I cannot pay anything more anywhere. That you are kind of solidified. That you are like stretched beyond your means. But I would also go back to those wants and say, is there anything short term? Think of it as a diet. And a diet is just saying, hey, we can do this. I want to do this, but I'm choosing not to. Not just the delayed gratification, but of saying, I'm choosing not to do this so that I can do this. And that's one of the things that is sometimes difficult. So if you want to write down anything that is related to what is something that you can do right now to look at, going based off of your wants and needs and saying, can I make a change here? And there's sometimes you're looking at it, and by the way, there's with tears. If you have not gone through finances or budgeting and not had a tear or two, or even just you're sniffing, awesome. Hallelujah, I am grateful for that. I have been through times, especially younger in life, sometimes later, where I'm like, this is difficult. Or if you have a family, why can't we do this? But for me, I've encouraged others, and I know we're going to have to get out of here. I've encouraged the conversation with my family. As little kids, letting my daughters and my son know, we are not doing this so that we can do this. I want them to be a part of it. I don't want them to think like, we can't do this. Like, sometimes we can't. But there's other times like, no, that's not a priority for us. And I want you to be a part of that so you're not thinking so that we don't get there like, well, they get to do it. Like, yeah, they do, and I'm grateful. And I want to be their friends, but, not for greedy, but great things. So last one, I know I'm trying to go through this quickly. It's tough to do stuff for finances in short. And I like it, as you can tell. Can you go to the next one? Yeah, I was going to try and have this go one by one. But if you'll notice up here, there's a little bit of a theme that you'll see. Stick to it, ask for help, stick to it. And the reason why is when you go through a budget, when you're going through, you've prayed through this and you are revising and doing whatever, is stick to your plan. Unless there is a good reason, and I'm not saying like, hey, my greediness or my disobedience, that's not a good reason to change it. But if you've prayed, and I even wrote this down for myself, if you've prayed, set your plans and let God direct. Because in the end, was God wrong? Did we not listen? Were we disobedient? Did I do something that I shouldn't have done? Did I say, hey, as a family, we're doing this, or as an individually, we're waiting for this. We're having this delayed gratification. And I'm like, forget it. Look at your entertainment. I'm going to tell you right now, we have Netflix, we have Hulu. Oh, we have way too much. And it's like, we're going to cut cable and we're going to save the money. And yet, you're like, and it adds up. And you're like, it's only $5 here. It's only $10 here. Add that up. And then multiply it by 12. That's what you're spending in a year. These are the things that if we're looking at and saying like, okay, well, I can't do, I'll say it this way. I can't pay off debt. I can't save. I'm not going to pay tithes. Or I can't pay tithes. And maybe you don't want to pay tithes, but I can't do. I'm like, what else am I looking at? And those are the first things that I'm talking with my wife about, of saying, you know what? We're going to cut this out. Sometimes we bring it back in, but there's other times after we've cut it out. You can even ask my daughter. She's like, After we've cut it out, rarely do we actually bring it back in, because we find out that there's something else that comes up. And as someone who has an automobile, usually it's repairs. If you're a mechanic and you know how to do your own cars, you will save a ton of money. If not, or you buy an expensive car or one that has a computer in it, you're like me. You're taking it to someone and it costs some money. That's usually, I'm like, all right, we're in a good spot. Oh, my daughter's driving. Oh, there's $700 or more a month for insurance. And I'm grateful. I'm like, I'm grateful she's getting older. We're driving. Oh, that takes out a budget. It was actually great. I'll give this example. We paid off a car. I was like, oh, man, that's awesome. That's money that's going back into our account. And then our year up for our insurance said, hey, she's no longer free. You have to put her on a car. I'm like, all right. Oh, man, that'd be awesome if it just correlates. And it's like, no, we're doubling it. I'm like, But I'm grateful, that my daughter's driving and everything else that's related to it. You want to get a car, insurance, gas, all the maintenance. But if you're looking at this from a holistic standpoint, if you're trusting the Lord, this allows us to go forward with that. But I do want to say one last thing just for this one. This is the last thing, and we can kind of end with this. I'll ask you a question, or if you want to ask any questions. I know we're short on time. But write down anything that is going to distract you or motivate you from what you can plan for. And say, you know what? I really like, this is going to distract me. For me, it's music equipment. I will tell you this, if I'm talking about music equipment or anything that I have done, I talk to my wife and I give her, I'm like, hey, here's all the pros on this. And there's a double list of cons of saying, like, I want you to say no. But I'm giving her, and she's good. No, but we go through this where I'm like, no. And sometimes she will say yes. I'm like, you know what? No, we need to wait. We have a washer and a dryer and a refrigerator that needs to be replaced. But they're still working. We've saved up a while for this. And I'm like, we have the money to do it. I'm like, they're not done yet. I'm going to use them up. Like we've used a lot of like the wineskins, old wineskins. I'm like, until that sucker bursts, I'm like maybe a little pinhole and wine leaking out. I'm like, I'm going to use it because I don't want to put finances to something that's like, oh, I could do that, but it's not necessarily for me. I'll always go back to me. That's not the right thing. And for the first 18 years of my life, I know what it's like to go without. And I sometimes forget not everybody goes through that situation. So I always look at it for me and saying, like, is this worth not eating next month? And there's sometimes we're not in that situation anymore. But I always look at it. Anything can go wrong. Hey, there can be a pandemic that shuts everything down. And jobs. And saying, like, is this worth it in the long run? I'm not saying don't enjoy, you can't take it with you, but thinking of long-term for finances. So I know that, again, we're over time, but I don't want to kind of shove this out. Any questions? Anything, clarification? Any like, hey, I don't agree with that at all? No? Okay. Anybody on YouTube? No? No? Pretty silent. No, I'm just messing. I'm just messing. But thank you. You know what? Let's pray. And my apologies for not praying in the beginning, but I do want to end in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for the time that we can get together. Lord, I know that it's super short. I know that's a lot of my enthusiasm for this, or just, Lord, wanting to share what you have. And I pray that people heard your voice, your spirit, and not just my words. I pray that those who might listen to this later on will hear you and not me. This is not the James anything, but it's what you have, Lord. I pray that you would bless everybody here, Lord, whether it be finances on earth or treasure in heaven. I pray that you would allow us to follow you, to allow our finances to be used for your glory, not just our comfort, not just for anything else, Lord, but you promise to provide for our needs. And I pray that we would surrender to that, submit to what you have for us, and partner with you in what you have, not only for our lives, but for us as a church as well. And I thank you for that. In Jesus' name, amen.